Hello, and welcome to Sustainable Outlook, a podcast from global law firm K&L Gates, where we discuss the transactions, technologies, and trends in the sustainable economy. We hope you enjoy this discussion. Please reach out with suggested topics or guests, or questions about how we can work together to create a sustainable economy.
Welcome to this episode of Sustainable Outlook. I'm Molly Barker, your host for today's episode and an attorney in the Environmental and Energy Practice Group at K&L Gates. I'm very excited to be joined today by Kathleen Hurley, Senior Environmental Program Manager at the Port of Seattle. In her role at the Port, Kathleen manages the Habitat and Stewardship Program, which includes projects related to urban habitat restoration, ocean acidification, orca recovery, and habitat mitigation banking. Prior to working at the Port, Kathleen worked at the crossroads of economic development, climate change, and natural resource management in over a dozen countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean on behalf of the U.S. Agency for International Development, the United Nations Development Program, and the World Bank. She has master's degrees in international environmental policy from Tufts University and in environmental science from Western Washington University. She's excited to create meaningful connection between human and natural environments, and in her spare time can be found on human-powered adventures with her dog, Rufus. Thanks so much for joining us, Kathleen.
Thanks, Molly. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So let's get started by just hearing from you about, what led you to get involved with the Port of Seattle.
Thanks for that question, Molly. I think there are a number of reasons that I was interested in joining the Port of Seattle. They are a forward-looking port and a mission-driven organization that has ambitious environment and equity goals, as well as climate goals. And after working a number of years in the international development space as a technical advisor, I was really looking for an opportunity to make an impact in my local region and environment, as well as being part of a team that was working on solutions to environmental and sustainability issues with the goal of creating resilient and self-sustaining habitats and ecosystems. And the port in and of itself is a complex organization. We are an economic development agency. We are a special purpose government that serves the citizens of King County, and obviously our impact extends beyond that. So what was very intriguing to me about working with the port is the complex context in which we operate, and then the opportunities that presents related to creating solutions to environmental and sustainability issues. I work on the maritime side of the port. We have two major divisions, our aviation side that runs the airport, and then we have our seaport side, which is our maritime side.
Can you walk through then with our listeners about what you do there in your role as Senior Environmental Program Manager?
Absolutely. I work on maintaining and or implementing new restoration projects within this highly urbanized industrial context, as well as identifying new locations for restoration projects. I also work on ecological valuation of these sites to ensure that they are performing and providing the ecological benefits that we're hoping for. Additionally, these sites provide important social benefits, green space, and this urbanized environment. So that's one component of my work. We have a habitat mitigation bank, which is a conservation finance structure or approach, I should say. And essentially, when we build these restoration sites, the regulating agencies can approve these sites to have a certain number of habitat credits that the port can either use for our purposes for mitigation, or those can be sold to other entities within the lower Green Duwamish. And that additionally supports the port's mission to support maritime trade and industry. So that's one component of my work, is kind of this restoration planning and mitigation banking. I also lead a number of initiatives related to research and development, blue carbon initiatives, kelp research in our local waters, orca protection, and also a number of other, I sit in a number of policy groups where I provide input and hopefully support advancing goals around stewardship and habitat within our region.
So could you explain to our listeners what the term blue carbon means and what the role the port is playing in the blue carbon arena and the interplay between blue carbon and ocean acidification.
And we've launched a really exciting partnership with the Seattle Aquarium just this year to map and characterize these urban kelp beds. And as I mentioned, kelp is considered potentially quite important for sequestration of carbon and in this blue carbon topic. I will say that the science around how much blue carbon kelp sequesters and if we were to say restore a ton of kelp and what that impact would be is still being investigated because of the life cycle of the bull kelp. But that said, they provide a number of ecological benefits as well as shoreline protection. So we're really excited to undertake this work with the Seattle Aquarium to use an underwater drone, essentially, that will investigate these urban kelp beds here.
Are there other things that the port is doing to improve habitat in Puget Sound, or is that kind of the primary thing that the port is undertaking at this point when it comes to habitat improvement?
It's a great question, and we have ambitious plans to restore or improve 40 acres of habitat in the lower Duwamish waterway, and we are well on our way to do that. So in addition to the kelp and the eelgrass work, we're actually transforming some of these industrial lands back to tidal estuarine marsh. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a highly industrialized landscape, and it's entirely manufactured, it's filled, and we are aiming to help, where we can, help restore habitat in the lower Duwamish waterway. So we are almost complete with a project in the South Park neighborhood in the lower Duwamish. It's called the Duwamish River Peoples Park and Shoreline Habitat. It is a 14-acre habitat site, primarily marsh, off-channel marsh, and riparian. There's also a public access component to this particular site, providing an asset and a connection for the South Park community and for others to connect to the Duwamish River. This is the largest habitat restoration project undertaken to date on the lower Duwamish, and we're extraordinarily excited and proud of this project and of the partnerships that have been required to implement this project over time. It's been over 20 years in the making. So that is I would say one of our near-term projects, and we'll be entering into a 10-year monitoring phase starting later this summer. So that's one project that we're working on and moving us toward our 40-acre goal. We have another project in the planning phase that's a 10-acre project in a slightly more salt water area of the East Waterway, and that will similarly provide marsh and riparian and improved intertidal habitat. And this is critical for salmonids. Obviously, what we're trying to do is help create some refugia along the way in the Duwamish as salmon return to the Duwamish to reproduce. And right now it's formidable because there aren't that many kind of stopping places for salmonids. We also think that these habitat sites will provide benefit for other wildlife and small mammals and other resident waterfowl. So those are a few of the different initiatives that we're undertaking related to habitat restoration. We've identified a number of different sites that we're looking at right now. We're undertaking due diligence surveys to identify opportunities and constraints on some slightly bigger sites that aren't the same size. They're not 14 or 10 acre sites, but they might be half an acre or a little bit more modest in size. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like there's quite a variety of sizes in the projects that are being performed by the port, which is great. Staying on this topic of habitat improvement, maybe how it intersects with species, what, if anything, is the port doing to address the declining orca population in Puget Sound?
That's a really important topic for the port, and I know for so many people in Puget Sound, the orcas are an incredibly iconic species in our region. They're important to to tribal communities. They're important to the general public, and their populations have been declining. I think as of today, maybe it's 73, I want to say, in our resident pods. And related to that, the port has a number of initiatives to help hopefully protect the orcas. And one is the restoration projects that I've been mentioning. And those are critically important because they provide habitat for salmon, which are the prey of the orca. And loss of habitat has impacted the natal streams of salmonids and thus the prey source for orcas. So that's one area where we are undertaking work where we think that there will be, hopefully, we hope that there will be positive benefits for the orca population. Additionally, the Port of Seattle, along with the Port of Tacoma and the Northwest Seaport Alliance, we were, and with other partners, we were part of the founding group of the Quiet Sound program. And the Quiet Sound program is housed at Washington Maritime Blue, which is a local nonprofit that works to reduce underwater noise from large commercial vessels. That's large commercial vessels that will ultimately benefit, and the target is to help protect the remaining orcas and help create a less noisy underwater acoustic environment. So the Port of Seattle is an active participant and also supporter of this program. We are working with industry partners to develop and with Quiet Sound to develop approaches to alert commercial mariners as to when orcas might be in their navigational path so that they can take appropriate action, which often looks like slowing down. We also are undertaking a number of other initiatives with Quiet Sound to help support some of their work on this understanding the underwater acoustic landscape. And the port will be kicking off a study with the University of Washington Applied Physics Lab and NOAA later this year to understand what the hydrophone landscape is in Puget Sound. So essentially, what are the tools that are being used out there to listen to the underwater acoustics, and then to also make recommendations as to what we can do to improve that network and strengthen that network of underwater acoustics, the hydrophones, I should say, so we can utilize that potentially for a trial vessel slowdown. And that's something that Quiet Sound is leading, the vessel slowdown. The work that we're doing with this hydrophone study is aligned with some of the goals that the Quiet Sound program has. We're also developing an underwater noise management plan. Oh, wow. So that will help us understand, help us strategize as we move forward what measures we need to take when to reduce our underwater noise impact. We already have a number of measures, best management practices in place that we apply when, for example, the port is undertaking a maintenance project at one of our facilities, and we have marine mammal monitors, and if there are orcas that are spotted in the area, then work ceases until that group of whales has transited out of the area. So there are already a number of kind of best management practices that we employ, and this underwater noise management will help us identify, how we can go beyond that. So those are areas in which we are working to address the orca population.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's great to hear though that the port has such a built-out plan on orca recovery. It seems multi-layered and multifaceted, which is probably what needs to happen to get the orca population to rebound. So hopefully we start to see results from those efforts. So switching gears a little bit, I do understand that in October of last year, 2021, the Port of Seattle Commission voted to accelerate its carbon reduction goals to be net zero by 2040, and that emissions from industries operating at its facilities be carbon neutral or better by 2050. What initiatives is the port taking to meet this objective that you know of?
Yeah, I think there are a number of objectives that the port's undertaking to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And the port is committed to being the greenest, most energy efficient port in North America. It's a big goal. And that commitment is reflected in the port's Century Agenda strategic objectives and our significant investments in our environmental programs. So I'm going to admit that some of this response will be more skewed toward the maritime side, and mainly that's because that's what I'm more familiar with. However, before I dive into that, I will note that our airport has a sustainable airport master plan, which guides airport development and includes focuses on air quality, energy, water conservation, recycling, and other strategic environmental goals. And that aligns with the port's sustainability and energy efficiency goals. And one aspect of that across the port that includes aviation is the sustainable fleet plan. And a large number of our emissions do come from port-owned fleet vehicles across both divisions. And it accounts for nearly a quarter of all port-owned or controlled emissions. So we are utilizing biodiesel, a biodiesel blend, and we're fueling all of our marine maintenance vehicles with renewable diesel. Our aviation maintenance shop also began fueling all diesel vehicles with renewable diesel in 2018. We also in 2020 signed a contract for renewable natural gas that dramatically reduced emissions from what was previously the largest source of fleet greenhouse gas emissions, which was the airport's fleet of 44 buses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So renewable natural gas is essentially biogas, which is the product of decomposition of organic matter. And it's basically been processed to purity standards so that it can be interchangeable with what we'd call traditional compressed gas. And so this can significantly reduce emissions of nitrogen oxides and particulate matter. And so that's critically important for local air quality benefits. We're also working on, at the airport, installation of electric vehicle charging stations at the airport, also at Fisherman's Terminal and at Chilchul Bay Marina, as well as in the parking garages at both the airport and at marine maintenance. So that sustainable fleet plan continues to be used to evaluate and recommend strategies that will help the port reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our vehicle fleet in order to meet some of those goals. And then we have on the maritime side, we have a couple of other really great and ambitious programs to reduce greenhouse gases. One is the Northwest Ports Clean Air Strategy. And this is, I think, what you referred to before, which is to phase out maritime industry emissions by 2050. And the port aims to reach net zero by 2040. And in order to accomplish this is really kind of a wholesale transformation of our waterfront in terms of what types of energy we use. So we are also working in partnership with the Seattle Waterfront Clean Energy Strategy, the Port of Seattle, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, and Seattle City Light, and that to help decarbonize Seattle's maritime industry by those stated goals. Another part of this is the Maritime Climate and Air Action Plan, which is our plan to address climate change and air pollution from maritime sources. And that vision guides us as well in terms of reducing greenhouse gases. One component of that I think is unique to the Port of Seattle is requiring cruise ships to utilize shore power. And at this point, not all of our cruise berths are set up for shore power, but we are working on that. In particular, we are working to bring shore power to Pier 66 in downtown Seattle. This will provide clean electricity to ships at the dock and help sustainably grow the cruise industry in Seattle, which is an essential economic driver in the region. And once we complete shore power at Pier 66, this will mean that all 3 cruise berths in the Seattle area are electric, which is really amazing. And it's also one of the most effective techniques to reduce port-related maritime air emissions in the Northwest. And so essentially, this will allow cruise ships to plug in giant plugs once they come to birth in Seattle. And that also has a benefit related to air pollution.
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like there's, quite the laundry list of initiatives the port is taking to, meet its objective for, becoming net zero by 2040, which is great to hear. And talking about the charging stations, so to speak, as you said, for the ships, I am curious to know if that has anything to do with the next question I have for you, which is about a green corridor that the port has unveiled, specifically in April 2022 of this year. The port announced that it will soon be working with major cruise lines in Vancouver, British Columbia, and Juneau, Alaska, to develop the world's first cruise-focused green corridor from Seattle to Alaska. And so I'm curious to know, what does this green corridor mean? Why is it unique? And, does it have anything to do with what you were talking about in terms of charging spots for these vessels at each of those, locations?
Yeah, I think related to the shore power, the green corridor really offers an opportunity for what we're calling the first movers through collaboration across sectors to share technological and economic and regulatory innovation that's needed to reach zero greenhouse gas emissions in this corridor. So I will add that since that announcement, a number of other, so it's Port of Seattle, the City and Borough of Juneau, Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, leading global cruise lines, as well as the Global Maritime Forum, the Blue Sky Maritime Coalition, and Washington Maritime Blue. And there have been some additional members in addition to those that I just mentioned that are joining this green corridor. So there's a lot of excitement and interest about the green corridor. And essentially the origin of this is that in 2021, the U.S. and Canada signed the Clydebank Declaration. And this basically committed us to supporting the establishment, the U.S., to supporting the establishment of at least 6 green corridors by 2025. Okay. And so it's up to these first movers to collaborate and basically define and implement the pathway to get to zero. So we're really excited to have these phenomenal partners to basically work and explore the feasibility of a maritime route where zero greenhouse gas emission solutions are demonstrated and supported. Obviously, this effort requires a lot of sharing of technology, innovation, coordination amongst the different ports of entry and the different participants. And essentially, the focus here is to support each other's decarbonization work along this green corridor and bring resources to bear and technological advancements to this effort. And here in this green corridor, we're fortunate because we're already very diversified. There's already a lot of innovation in this area. We already have connections because of the Alaska fisheries, because of cruises. This has been kind of a trade corridor, commerce corridor for many, many years. And so it's only natural that as we embark on a new type of new ambitions related to zero emissions, that Washington, British Columbia, and Alaska work together on this. And I think that there's a lot of excitement about it, and more to come certainly as this develops. Because as you mentioned, it's a new initiative, and we're excited to see where it leads us and what innovation and technological advancements come out of it.
Well, I'm sure it will be definitely something to watch, since it sounds like it's a project, the first of its kind. So it will be exciting to watch. So my last question here is, does the port, have, its next big goal that it's undertaking or eyeing, or, what is it currently looking at in the next, 5-10 years, to the extent you haven't mentioned it already on our talk?
for us to achieve these goals that we've talked about today, whether it's greenhouse gas reduction or restoration of habitat or reaching zero greenhouse gas emissions from ships and operations between Alaska and this green corridor, we're really focused on that right now and achieving those goals and figuring out the ways that what we need to change operationally or adapt operationally to achieve those goals. And so I think we have our hands full at the moment. That's not to say, we certainly keep our eyes open for additional goals, and we want to continue to enhance the sustainability of our region and create positive benefits for everyone.
Well, and it seems like, the goal of, achieving, net zero by 2040 seems to be a pretty big undertaking. So those types of objectives are going to take a huge amount of energy, and, things like, rebuilding the orca population is, almost spreading yourself too thin would, alleviate the progress that you're going to be making on these huge undertakings already. So I can see that for sure.
Yeah. And I will say one other component of this is when we talk about sustainability, or when I think about sustainability, I think about those three legs of the stool, right? The economic, the environmental, and the social component. And ultimately, too, and I haven't focused on this as much in our conversation, but the equity piece and the social benefit piece of, for example, all of this work, but we see it especially with the habitat improvements that we're making and access to green space and working on increasing representation in the maritime fields is really important to the port, and engaging with near port communities to understand, their concerns and how they're impacted and what some of their perspectives are. It will continue to be important and an integral part of our work. And so that is the other piece when I think about sustainability that is a critical and equally important piece of the sustainability conversation as well, along with the economic component as well as the environmental component.
Yeah, no, very, very well said. Very well said. Well, thank you, Kathleen, and thank you to those of you who are listening to this episode of Sustainable Outlook. We hope you will join us again soon as we continue to explore the intersection of environmental, social, and economic sustainability. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainable Outlook. To listen to past episodes and receive notices for new episodes, subscribe by searching Hub Talks, that's HUB Talks, in your favorite podcast app. We hope you will tune in next time to learn more about the outlook of the burgeoning sustainable economy.